Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our presentation. The main speaker today will be Shana Pandya. I wanted to say a few things about the singularity in general, and I think these are concepts that we will come back to from time to time in the course. As the idea of the singularity becomes mainstream, it's becoming clear that it exists in a variety of flavors. And actually, one of the nice things about Singularity University is it reflects that full diversity of what various people mean by the term singularity. You therefore get a broad and balanced education there. But let me give you an idea what some of this spectrum is. And it's probably broader than you ever imagined. You might imagine that the idea of the singularity loses meaning entirely if you say that it's already occurred. And yet there are lots of people who are claiming that, oh well, the singularity in the future is just one of many singularities, like the Industrial Revolution and the beginning of farming and all those sorts of things. And actually the executive director of Singularity University, Salim Ismail, has recently given an interview on Singularity One-on-One, in which he said that waking up in the morning is a singularity. He seems to suggest that consciousness is a singularity, and that anything surprising in life for you personally is. So defined that way, then the idea of a future singularity doesn't have quite as much meaning as it does to most people. But one would say that's a vague and non-rigorous approach, but it is not an uncommon approach. And there are people at SU who have this idea that the singularity is everywhere. So that can be surprising and can make it hard for you to conceptualize really what the singularity really is when there are people who have that very broad concept of it. And then if you believe, as most people do, that the singularity hasn't happened yet, that it's a future event, then that future event needs to be further defined. Is it an event? Is it a process? Is it fast? Is it slow? Is there going to be a hard takeoff, a soft takeoff? Is there a precise significance to the year 2045? Or is it really not reasonable to specify any projected date when this is going to happen? There are basically three schools of belief about the singularity, and we will talk about them later in detail, but they are basically the accelerating change school, the event horizon school, and the intelligence explosion school. And believe it or not, it's sort of like thinking about religions and various flavors of religions. Then within each of them, there are various paths. So these are the schools, these are not the paths. And within each school, there are various potential paths. There are four potential paths to the singularity. The first is to create an AI, an artificial intelligence that exceeds human intelligence. The second is to build a human-computer interface that allows humans themselves to go beyond their intellectual limits now. So this is a kind of cybernetic singularity where we're merging with machines and becoming super intelligent that way. The third way is to find ways in biology to improve upon natural human intellect. And then the fourth way which I'm sure you've all thought about, is like the internet coming alive, becoming sentient, talking to you. You may feel like that's happening now, but it's really not. So the idea of a large computer network in which beyond human intelligence emerges. And basically all four of these paths are probably possible within each of the three schools that I outlined. And we will talk more about this later in the course. All these different variations on the belief in the singularity are reflected in the courses at SU. And therefore, the experience of attending SU is one that grows and grows after completion of the course. So it's unlike other experiences where you go and you take a course, and from the moment you finish, you're forgetting what you learned. And the course is becoming less vivid, and within a few weeks, there's maybe only 10% of it there. And within a year, there's maybe only 1% of it there. And 5 years from then, you maybe are not even sure that you took the course. You can't remember anything. This is entirely different. And part of it has to do with not only the course material, but also the people. That you make friendships there with all these fantastic people. You can't possibly imagine such interesting, bright, and engaging people. And those friendships continue, and you come back for the reunions, and you find other ways to be involved, and projects build upon projects. So the day you leave, the last day of the course, it's just sort of a start of a burgeoning, singularity kind of in your own life of this growing and growing. So in that sense, the associated memories become more vivid rather than less vivid with time, and they're kind of on an exponential curve of their own. So it's a very unusual life experience from that point of view. Now, anytime you get in a group of people and start talking about this, they'll bring up Ray Kurzweil. And what I have noticed is that you'll often hear arguments that, there's some sort of Ray Kurzweil straw man who's an extremely rigid and narrow-thinking guy who's kind of strange and weird, and he hasn't thought of this and he hasn't thought of that. And actually, you find that Ray Kurzweil is exactly the opposite of that. The most remarkable thing about him is how broad he is, and whichever counter argument you're going to put forward to his ideas, he's probably already thought of it and knows more about it than you do. And as soon as you think that he's very narrow compared to you, he doesn't have your breadth, then you find that he knows about all sorts of things that you never imagined. He's given lectures on beauty and whimsy and all sorts of things like that. So that argument, which you will commonly hear people attempting to box him in and then show how their ideas are more reasonable than his because he rigidly hasn't considered this, that, or the other thing. This is really not the way the world is. And in fact, anybody who's opposed to his views and takes the time to write to him will probably get back a very reasonable reply, accepting part of what you posit, pointing out other things you hadn't thought about. And so he has an amazing breadth. And of course, he's done real things. He's been honored by 3 U.S. presidents. He's, invented a reading system for the blind. He's done lots of other real things that may actually be more than what the person challenging him has done. So that's one of the interesting things about this. And so I would just point out that this will happen to you. I mean, as you start talking about this, you'll get people talking about Ray, and they will be assuming some simple distillation of what he's all about, and then trying to show that that's not entirely reasonable. Finally, I want to talk one thing about Ray, and I want to start with the idea of, suppose we were to do a movie of your life, any of the audience's life. How would we do that? How would we make a good movie of your life? Well, it's not entirely about being positive about your life. It's about making the movie be really cool and memorable. So we want to find something that's so strange and striking and weird about you that people will say, well, that was a really memorable film. And for Ray Kurzweil, that is bringing his father back. And so you find people say, well, it's so strange that he wants to bring his father back. It makes for a really good movie, and I believe it became a much bigger part of his life once the movie maker got hold of the idea than it was before that. And you would all have things in your own life that are like that would make you seem strange and weird, or only a very small part of what you're doing. But to make a really good movie about your life, we would want to enhance that. So that's the other thing that I would point out, that the criticism of SU, the Singularity, and so on, that focuses on Ray Kurzweil wanting to bring his father back, that's not a particularly valid criticism. And if that's the biggest flaw the guy has, it isn't that bad. So those were the things I wanted to tell you. I think Singularity University, as we said last time, is mainly about creating companies, fostering innovation, and I think that's mainly what Shauna is going to talk about. But I thought you also needed this background to begin thinking more broadly about the ideas here. Okay, so now Shauna's going to come up and speak.
All right, so everyone, thank you for coming. For those of you who were here last week, hello again. So you might remember me. My name is Shauna, and I'll introduce myself further in the next few minutes. But first of all, I just want to thank Kim for that excellent introduction, because it's the perfect fodder for what we're about to discuss further. So this lecture that I'm going to give you is going to be given to you in 3 parts. It's going to start with a little bit more about Singularity University. What exactly is it? What is the structure? Why is it such a big deal? And then as a little bit of continuation of that, as well as last week's lecture on innovation and technology and trends in medicine, a little focus on my own company that came out of Singularity University. And then, as promised from last week, some pearls on the whole design and innovation and startup process. So if any point in time you have questions, concerns, please feel free to ask them. If you want to heckle or throw a tomato, maybe save that for a different lecture. So let's go onwards and upwards and forwards. So I'm calling this part of the talk Flavors of the Singularity. Subtitle Singularity, You, and Civigard. And this is actually just in reference to Kim's slides as to what the heck is the singularity. So in its purest sense, in the Kurzweilian sense, the singularity is this whole concept that sometime in the 2040s there will be a singularity point, at which point robots and computers and mankind will become one and the same. Now, as to what form that will take, whether that's the next Skynet, God forbid, or whether that's the evolution of the first cyborg, nobody knows. But that's the official Kurzweilian term. However, for those of us who have been exposed to the institution Singularity U, it's a little bit more than that. And so that's where I'm going to start. So just to give you a little bit of background about myself, I was a student at the very first ever graduate studies program, which you're going to hear more about in a few slides' time. I was also a teaching fellow at numerous executive programs and the first ever FutureMed program, as well as co-founder of one of the startups, Civigard, that came out. All right, so Singularity U, the textbook definition, textbook mission statement. Our mission is to assemble, educate, and inspire a cadre of leaders who strive to understand and facilitate the development of exponentially advancing technologies to address humanity's challenges. Okay, but what the heck does that mean? Well, there's several ways in which I would frame it. So, first of all, if you forget anything else, I would phrase it as Disneyland for smart people. It is where creative people, innovators, people who want to think outside the box, people who want to bridge gaps with other disciplines, be they computer scientists, roboticists, space physicists, astronauts, Nobel laureates, where they come to bridge minds and exchange ideas. So Disneyland. In the context of the singularity. So, textbook definition again. We see here that not only do they want to leverage technology and further technology, they want to do it to address humanity's grandest challenges, be they in climate change, energy, healthcare, water. So for me, that's what the singularity has actually come to mean, and that's what I've come to pitch it to anyone who asks me what the heck Singularity U is taking the very extremes of humanity at one hand, taking the best of what we've done in terms of technology and innovation and grand ideas, and using that and pairing that to take the worst of our human challenges in terms of survival, and pairing those. So surviving versus thriving, bringing them together. And that for me is the singularity. And that's the basis upon which I'm going to, or the framework or mind frame from which I'll be explaining to you Singularity University. So earlier in his talk, Kim talked about 3 concepts in the singularity. He talked about accelerating change, the explosion of intellect and intellectual ideas, and the event horizon. So I'm going to be talking to you about 2 of the 3 of those, namely accelerating change, as this is an institution that focuses on exponential versus linear trends in technology, as well as the explosion of intellect. As for event horizon, I leave that more to the concept of the Kurzweilian singularity, where there's no looking back, where what has emerged, whether they are cyborgs or Skynet or whatever, will be less a part of this talk. So, Singularity U. Located in NASA Ames, Silicon Valley in California. There's 3 programs. So, like I said, the Graduate Studies program is the main focus. It takes place every summer. It initially started out as a 9-week program. It's a 10-week program, which you're going to hear a little bit more about in the next few slides. There's also an executive program for busy professionals who are interested to learn more about what's at the forefront in their own industry or their own field, as well as those that might be relevant to them. But shorter, because, you know, as a CEO or as a C-level executive, you can't necessarily take 10 weeks off your company unless you're ready to see it fall to the ground. So those are 4 to 9-day programs. And then very excitingly, and probably more of interest for those in this audience, is the launch of the Future Med program, which was actually had its first session this past May, and its second session this coming February, which focuses specifically on trends and developments and frontiers in medicine. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Women at the Frontier, which is another spin-off of Singularity University, which is close to my heart because it really focuses on women who are doing cutting-edge things in global challenges, in technology and the sciences, and who are trying to bring their work to the forefront and have real-life implications. All right, so like promised, I'm going to talk to you about the Singularity Graduate Studies program, and from there I'm going to tell you a little bit of how it's evolved, Savigard evolved out of it, and we're going to go forward from there. So, Singularity University, founded 2009, on a concept by one brilliant person who read another brilliant person's book. So, last week I talked a little bit about Peter Diamandis, founder of the X Prize Foundation, founder of the International Space University, Harvard MD graduate who decided, well, maybe there's better things I can do with my life than medicine, which frankly most of us here would say, well, you could be saving lives. What could be more grand than that? But he decided he wanted to put his energy towards innovating and furthering humanity as a race. So he was backpacking through South America years and years ago when he read this book by this Ray Kurzweil persona called Singularity. The singularity is near. He thought, what a brilliant concept. Now, what if we could somehow amplify that, magnify that by by bringing those minds who are passionate about change, passionate about innovation, passionate about their fields, and bring them together and start having them talk to each other, then give them challenges to work on, challenges that would have real lasting impact on humanity. And so I thought, well, I founded one university already, that was over 20 years ago, maybe it's time to do another. And lo and behold, Singularity University was born. So in 2009, all came together very quickly. It was announced at TED in Long Beach, 2009. The application process was opened. Over 1,600 people from 70 countries applied, and in 10 different tracks, which you're going to hear more about in the next slide. And all of a sudden, they had 40 students coming for 9 weeks, and there was a scramble to figure out how we could focus those minds on coming up with something productive and concrete at the end of the summer. So in that first year, they concentrated those first 4 weeks on an intro to the 10 core tracks that they deemed vital in technology, innovation, and knowing about the future. And then also, they realized that, we might be doing well in our own fields, but might be time for us to branch out and learn more about other fields. And that's what weeks 5 and 6 were for. It was designed for us to take a deeper dive into fields outside our realm of comfort, outside of what we knew, and do hands-on real-world application in that. And then, weeks 7 to 9, the 10 to the 9 plus team project. All right, so let's focus on weeks 1 through 4. This was the broad introduction to medicine, neuroscience, human enhancement, biotechnology, informatics, policy, law, and ethics, because, if you're going to build Skynet, you should probably, hopefully, have some sort of ethical guiding compass light while you do that. Future studies and forecasting, a very emerging field, but now very well studied. Had some excellent lectures in that from all over, including Stanford University. Energy and ecological systems, because as we know, green energy is a very, very important field these days. We know that our carbon emissions are becoming higher and higher, that our carbon fuels, our fossil fuels aren't going to last us forever. Computers and network systems, AI and robotics, space and physical sciences, nanotechnology, and finance and entrepreneurship. And we were quite lucky in terms of the faculty that we were invited into this very, very passionate, well-connected, well-versed community of intellectuals. The head of faculty is Dan Barry, who is a multiple-time shuttle astronaut, as well as awarded for his work in medicine and in robotics. We've had Nobel Prize laureates, founders of innovative companies such as Google come talk to us. And the most brilliant part about it all wasn't this sort of lecturer-student relationship. It was more ask questions, talk to us as peers, and more often than not, at the end of every single lecture, pretty much, we would often get this comment without fail that I've never been asked questions as innovative and out of the box, and I've never been challenged as a lecturer to think as I have been here at Singularity University. So it really was this playground for people to, be comfortable as an expert in their own fields, but also sort of branch out a little bit. Speaking of branching out, that's where weeks 5 and 6 of this program came in. So I myself, being more versed in neuroscience and medicine, knowing a little bit about space sciences, having done my master's there, want to learn more about computers and AI and robotics. And so in those 2 weeks, we did an amazing amount. We took field and site visits to local robotics companies such as Willow Garage, and we visited NASA's vertical motion simulator. We played around with our own robotics experiments, something as simple as the Lego Mindstorms kits. We learned to program them and fight each other for fun. And one of my favorite site visits was actually to the IBM research facility, where if you actually look here in the corner over here, we manipulated the atoms to say SU. So it was all this mind-blowing stuff. You're really at the forefront of technology. Some of it's for fun, some of it's to blow your mind, and most of it is just to get you thinking and start talking to your neighbors about, holy cow, this is all being done. Like, 100 years ago, hundreds of years ago, we didn't know that atoms existed. We thought, things happened by the will of God, right? And now we know that there's these subatomic particles, and not only do they exist, we can manipulate them. Sometimes you can get them to spell letters, as you will. And then in week 7 to 9 came the team project. So, this 10 to 9 plus challenge that I've been alluding to, what does that mean? Well, how would you positively impact 1 billion people in 10 years using accelerating technologies? How could you possibly? Well, in some circles, that might seem like an immense task, but when you're versed with the right people, the right environment, and the right team, you take one step further and say, well, that's one challenge, but why not ask if you could positively impact 7 billion people in 10 years? And that was the springboard, and that's where CivicGuard came from, and that's how I sort of took my launching pad from Singularity U. And this is exactly what Kim was alluding to earlier in his talk when he said that, many courses, you might have an excellent time, you might have fond memories, but the memory might fade as you go on. But Singularity U is exactly that, a launching pad where we learned our own limits, moved past them, switched tracks in some cases, launched brand new projects, and went onwards and upwards. So, this is sort of the transition point of the lecture where we go from those last 3 weeks where there were 20-hour days trying to like mad to figure out how we could possibly come up with anything as audacious that might possibly have some sort of impact on a lot of people, and ideally it would be a good impact. So we had this directive. 4 teams came out of this directive, out of these ideas, nights and long nights where we'd pitch ideas. At one point we had over 1,800 of them. We iterated down, and at the end we had 4 that would concentrate on for 3 weeks. So my own team, featured here, consisted of 9 brilliant teammates from 7 countries, including entrepreneurs, physicians, computer scientists, media experts. And so we focused on this 7 times 9 to the 10 billion person problem, or 7 times 9 to the 10 to the 9 plus. And we asked, okay, well, what is this problem? We came up with a problem space, and they said, what is a problem that affects anyone, anywhere, anytime? And I alluded to this last week when I said disasters, whether they are natural, whether they're man-made, whether you're referring to a bomb threat in New York, whether you're referring to tornadoes in Alberta, whether you're referring to earthquakes in Haiti or Chile, or nuclear disasters. They have the potential to impact every one of us at any time. And so we started big. We looked at the problem areas in disaster response today. There were 3 key areas that we focused on. One of them was the golden period in the time following any disaster when there's a need to quickly establish channels of aid. The need to deliver aid quickly, do so efficiently in a way that's targeted, to have portable materials. And what would eventually become the focus for CivicGuard, not emergency communications and emergency response. And so we iterated down after identifying these areas. And we realized that after a disaster, when you need to know what's going on, you need to have information that's trusted. This was actually an incredibly weak point. We're looking at how we did emergency communications today. And it doesn't necessarily need to be so, because we're moving into this trend and this era of real-time, geolocation, location-specific, circumstance-specific, and we have instant feedback in many other areas. So why not in the field of emergency alerts? And so, for example, many of you might remember last May there was some bomb threats in Times Square, New York, and instead of sending out, something that could have let people in the area know that, hey, you should probably get out of this area, and those further out know that, maybe don't go towards 44th and 46th. The official New York City Office of Emergency Management essentially sent out this message that said Broadway is closed between these two blocks. Nothing else. And it's an unfortunate situation because if you have a trusted authority who has the ability, who has the power to contact civilians in a way that's specific to their circumstance, to their location, you have the potential to do a lot of good, offer a lot of reassurance, and in some contexts, even save lives. Here's another example of a real-life alert. This is from the county of San Mateo, just outside San Francisco, saying, the National Weather Service has issued a blizzard warning. Okay, good to know there's a blizzard. What do you do about it? So this is where we come to realize that mass messaging, real-time or emergency alerts, they can be generic. They can be prone to failure. And even when they do work, they can be slow to get out. At the same time, we focused on trends in technology, and this is where the whole concept of exponential comes in, and accelerating trends and intellectual explosion. So, I talked a little bit about this last week when I said if you look at the trends of media and the concept of the radio, which took 50 years to reach 38 million people, while it took Facebook only 2, these are things that became opportunities to us. So we noticed that online networks, social networks like Facebook and Twitter were becoming increasingly prevalent, increasingly used, not just to connect with people, but to deliver information. We also looked at the trend of connected devices. At the end of last year, I believe the figure was 100 million smartphones in the US. Whereas the projections show that by the end of 2015, there would be, by the end of this year, at the end of 2011, there would be 100 million smartphones in the US, and by the end of 2015, over 3.5 billion of these worldwide. At the same time, you look at the social media use I was telling you about. 2007, about 100,000 Twitter users. You look at the figure today, it's closer to the order of 100 million. I believe Facebook reached its 700 millionth user earlier this year. So the trend was that this is all very positive. We're becoming more connected, not just in North America, but globally. And not only do we have these incredibly powerful devices that are incredibly personal, but they also have this ability to geolocate us, ability to give us information based on where we are. So why not leverage that in a time when you really might need it? And that's when we came up with the concept of emergency communications 2.0. So why not come up with something that's specific to your location, instantaneous, resilient to network failure, because face it, even the most advanced technology in times of crisis will fail. Why not come up with something that's faster than anything out there and that can offer feedback? Why not ask, what if a smartphone could save your life in a crisis? And so here's the basic architecture, very bare bones, of how the CiviGuard platform works. On the one hand, you have millions of users with their smartphones that are these incredible, powerful devices, essentially like policemen in your pockets that, if used right, can tell you where to go, what to do, and how to get there safely when you need to. And on the other hand, you have these offices of emergency management that really need to be able to connect with their civilian base in a time of crisis, do so in a channel that's known to be trusted, and also need to visualize what's going on in different parts of their area of interest. So, hopefully this video I'm about to show you will work, and if not, I have some screenshots. So, what if there was a gas leak in the university area right now? What would I see, or what would I hope to see on my smartphone? So here's a demo. Hopefully we can get this going. And if not, I can show you some screenshots of what exactly you would hope to see. So, it's going forward to the screenshots. Ideally, if I were in a situation where I wanted more information based on where I was, based on what's going on around me, maybe there's a gas leak nearby. What do I do? Where do I go? Where do I not go? What would be nice would be to have a trusted authority sending me information saying, hey you, we see you're in a danger zone. Not to worry, here's step-by-step information on a map as well as written on where to go and how to get there. In case you want more information on other areas of interest, maybe you need some medical aid, maybe you need some shelter or food, you can also apply those filters to your map and be routed there. You can also be given latest alerts of what's going on in your area of interest. And even if the system isn't completely available due to network failures, you still have offline options, such as offline access to known areas of interest, such as shelters, as well as known libraries of disaster information, such as the 72-hour survival kit, local embassies, information put out by FEMA in the U.S. and local emergency management agencies elsewhere. First aid kits as well. And then we don't have a screenshot of it, but we've also launched 2 new features where, my mom might know I'm at the university today and she might be freaking out, might be a little bit worried that, hey, where's my baby? What is she doing? Oh my gosh, I'm going to do mom things and just worry, right? So I can also just hit the button that says social and automatically update my Twitter or Facebook status with a message that says, I'm okay, I'm hurt, I'm trapped, have those coordinates geotagged and automatically put into my status so my friends and family know not to worry. We've also launched a new feature called Communities that allows people within a certain radius of each other to say, hey, I'm running out of water. I need water. Who else has water? So you can launch an I have or an I need request and communicate to each other that way. And then on the flip side, as a member of of a center of emergency management, I can actually manage a scenario very easily, very intuitively with a touch screen interface. And I can say, for example, I'm in New York and I need to send messages to different populations. So on my touch screen, I just outline my area of interest. I can do it by zip code. I can do it by custom delineation. I can do it by known area, say downtown, say university, and say, hey, anyone in this area needs to know not to get the heck out of there. Whereas people in the further area need to get messages saying, don't go any closer. And I can also put out information about new shelters that we're setting up. I can choose to set up new exits and route people towards that. And then the coolest part of this is it offers you feedback. So once you send this out to the population, you get information about how are people moving and what density do I need to change how I'm routing them. And are people not listening? If not, why? And maybe I can pinpoint those populations. So a question that we often get is, okay, well, that's all very well and good. That's a good concept, but networks tend to fail when crises occur. And so this sort of goes back to what I was talking about last week and what a lot of the audience mentioned last week is always have a plan B. And in this case, we've built in various operating scenarios depending on how much of the network's available. So when the network is perfectly available and everything's running at a perfect 100%, you get the full data, you get the full visual map that I was just showing you. The network's partially available, well, data isn't as reliable as, say, SMS, and so we go to text-based directions on an SMS basis. And then, there's no perfect solution to networks. They will fail, and there can be points where you have zero connectivity. There's 2 answers to that. From our end, we will provide access to last known messages. We provide offline access to locally known points of interest. There's still the offline libraries I was telling you about earlier. And then an encouraging trend that we're seeing is the onset and prevalence of portable Wi-Fi, which we've had the opportunity to see, especially at crisis camp demos, Wi-Fi towers that can broadcast for hundreds of feet and even hundreds of yards and even further now. So this is sort of going back to the concept of running a business, trying to run a startup, and trying to do some good while sustaining ourselves and going the for-profit route, so we're not constantly looking for grants, not constantly trying to raise money. Of course, trying to help 1 billion people doesn't always equate 10 to the 9 plus dollars. But where there's a will, there's always an opportunity. And if you go looking for these things, if you go looking for opportunities, if you go looking for markets, you can always, and if you're ready to pivot and you're adaptive, or if you're adaptable, you can always find a way to pivot your idea or your project or your business. And so what we found through our research is that, maybe governments who we're initially pitching to aren't ready to play ball because, there's a whole granting process to go through. We've been in a recession in 2008 and we might go into one again. The money isn't there. But this is a $39 billion worldwide market for continuity of operations and continuity of business. So when we first started off, our business model was naively saying, hey, you know what? This is great for governments. This is great for governments wanting to protect their civilians at the county, at the state, at the provincial, at the federal level. But government isn't always the fastest body to act. And necessarily, they have to be very careful. They have to be very meticulous in their granting rounds and in the way they act. But it doesn't make sense if you want to enact your solution in a real-world scenario. And so this goes back to that figure I just showed you about the worldwide market of continuity operations. So we looked even further, and in our research we came across some figures that said any business or any operation that will encounter disruption of their operations for over 10 days, 75 to 90% of those businesses won't recover. That's a huge deal if you're a business owner. So that's sort of where we got the idea of pivoting and saying, hey, we have this potentially life-saving technology, but we want to enact it in a real-world scenario. And so that's when we talked to companies like Nokia, who said to us, we wish we'd known about this when the Iceland volcano erupted, because we have over 100,000 employees worldwide, and many of them were stranded for days. And if we could have just, sent them messages saying, this is, our game plan from now on, or this is how we're going to continue to maintain at least a minimal level of operations, that would have saved us a ton of money. And it would have assured the safety of our workers. So where there's a will, there's a way. And this is the direction that we're heading in next. We've come up with a 2.0 version that we're going to be launching later this month. But the proof is in the pudding. What have we actually done other than created technologies? They're real-world application. So we've actually been thrilled by the phenomenal response that we've gotten to CiviGuard. We've launched a pilot with the city of Maynard, Texas, and that was shortly after coming out of technology development mode. So that was early 2000 or mid 2010. We've been named to Entrepreneur's list of 100 brilliant companies. We were invited to the White House to talk with their Office of Civic Engagement and Social Participation. They were really excited about the idea. We've been covered by BBC Focus, Inc. magazine. So it's been a really good ride so far. But we think that the hard work is still to be done, because right now we're at 8,000 down and 6 billion left to go. Some lessons that we've learned throughout this. One is, and Kim will be familiar with this next slide that's coming up, is what I say, dare, dare, always dare, because he was actually at the Singularity University alumni reunion at the end of August when we first came up with this concept in the space of 8 hours. Hurricane Irene was coming down on New York. We desperately wanted to help. Our CEO is from and lives in New York and is just passionate about that city. But in a situation like that, the New York City Office of Emergency Management is so busy fielding calls that there's no time to field through anything new without field testing it and put it in the field. So what we did with our Rockstar team of developers, in the space of 8 hours, we came out with a geolocating tool. So civyguard.com/Irene. Basically, you log into the site via your connected device, your laptop, your mobile phone, and then based on where you are, it'll say, hey, we see you're in the zone of danger. You need to evacuate here nearby shelters. Luckily for me, I was on the other coast in California at the time, so it said, you are safe. You're in this location. There's no need to evacuate, which is what you see right up there. So, coming towards the end of my time, and I do want to leave some time for discussions, but I did promise you to take a step back from, my journey throughout this, and talk a little bit about the broader themes of what I've learned in terms of design and innovation, and for those of you in the audience who have your own ideas that you've been sitting on, and you're wondering about what might help you. So just going back to the design process from the very beginning, and how we went about this. So from beginning to end, we were in this fortunate position that we were the very first class. So there was actually not very many constraints. But if you remember from last week, I told you that you need constraints to focus your mind, to focus yourselves, and actually come up with an idea or a process. So to begin with, we brainstormed. We brainstormed like mad. And at one point we had over 1,800 ideas, and we ranked and rated them. And then we abandoned that process because we realized that, maybe it's not the best way to go about it. Then we just realized, go for what fits the constraints of affecting a lot of people, doing a lot of good, and also what we're passionate about and what we'll pursue beyond the program. So we had multiple pitch nights where anyone with an idea would go up and pitch it. And then through a Darwinian-like process, survival of the fittest, those that were deemed most legitimate, the top 25 ideas, were invited to one big pitch night. And from there, we actually had an even further Darwinian selection where we had an expo night where you had to gather at least 7 members to your team in order to have the manpower and the brain power to go forward. And those would be projects that would be worked on. So 9 of us were passionate to want to work on disaster response, and that's where the whole CiviGuard concept was born. So I've covered the first 2. Identify the problem space, but know your constraints. Brainstorm like mad. There's no such thing as a bad idea to begin with. Later on, that might not be true. And ask questions and inform yourselves, because, we had entrepreneurs, we had lawyers, we had people from medicine, but none of us were disaster experts per se. It was just something that we saw an opportunity in. So we asked questions, we asked tons of questions, we informed ourselves, and we used the resources at hand. We were at NASA Ames, and they have a disaster assistance response team. We're in close proximity to the Bay Area Disaster Medical Assistance team, experts in the field at Stanford University. And we bugged them like mad, and we said, hey, this is our idea. Is this exciting to you? Is this interesting to you? Would it work in a real-life situation? And that's actually what convinced us to go forward as a company, because they said, you know what, I wish I had this in the field. This would save lives. We had the head of patient triage and coordination in Haiti, which came later in January 2010, come up to us and say, are you guys done prototyping yet? Because next time I'm out in the field, I want to use some of your triage technologies that you're developing, because that would help us immensely. And so that covers, asking questions, leveraging your team, leveraging what's at hand. And so how do you go in the space of 3 weeks from this big, multifaceted problem, identifying multiple areas in the field of disaster response, and then coming up with something concrete at the end of it? Start big, start quick, start dirty. Again, be audacious. Nothing is off limits. But then you need to iterate. So, like I said at the beginning, we came up with these concepts for using UAVs, which are unmanned aerial vehicles, to deliver aid. We came up with concepts for AI medicine in the field that could diagnose and even treat in the field. But those weren't here and now solutions. Those technology is coming along, but versus the smartphone trend versus what CiviGuard could do, it made more sense to focus and iterate upon CiviGuard. field test early, field test often, field test like mad. And so this goes back to where we were leveraging our resources, where we were bugging them, saying, hey, here's the latest version of our design, 1 week in, 2 weeks in, 3 days to go. What do you think of it? What do you think of this version? For those of you in the medical field, you'll know that PRN means as needed. So pivot, PRN. Redesign, refocus your thinking, rethink your targets as you need. And that's what will help you survive. There's some great research out here that are saying, actually those who pivot 2 to 3 times are more likely to succeed with their startup. That was the Startup Genome I'd mentioned to you, that project last week. And that's what, helped us realize that, if we want to get this technology tried, tested, and true, we're not going to do it through targeting only government. They're part of it, but not all of it. So, a summary of the design process: it's a behavior. It's not a department. It's not something that's easily taught unless you learn by hands-on experience. All right, so this last slide here is should be familiar from last week because I put it up briefly when I was talking about the whole innovation, designing a product process. I'm just going to talk to you a little bit more about in the context of CiviGuard and the lessons we learned. So, dare. Move quickly, and don't be afraid to go your outside conventional rules. So, for example, some of our best meetings and our best leads were gotten when we showed up to a conference, got up at 5 a.m., drove to Sacramento several hours, and then showed up and then said, hey, there's the Chief Intelligence Officer for California. She's in charge of making the decisions for emergency alerts. There she is. Grab her, introduce your idea in 30 seconds or less, and bam, we had a meeting with them. It meant going to venture capital meetings in Silicon Valley and saying, there is the angel investor that we want to target, and pitching him. It means scaring yourself and taking the road less traveled, which, if you remember from last week, I said I'd always wanted growing up to go from point A to point B, neuroscience to neurosurgery. And, here I am taking years off ad nauseum to do something different. So I talked about seizing every opportunity as well. Money isn't the only currency, is what I've come to learn as well. A lot of my contacts, a lot of my friends, a lot of our media exposure was made because we went out there, we saw like-minded people. And I learned that one of my passions is people, dealing with people, meeting people, learning about technology. And so I learned that in terms of people power, that's an immensely valuable currency. What I would do in my free time when I wasn't working with CiviGuard is when there was a very valuable technology conference, I would go up to them and say, I've worked social media, I've coordinated social media, and I've helped out with these conferences in the Valley. Do you need help? And in doing so, I would become very, very close with some very innovative, powerful minds of media, of blogs, of venture capital. And they came to know about CiviGuard, and, they wouldn't necessarily promote us or plug us, but they would, when they saw an opportunity, they'd pass it on to us. This one should be pretty self-explanatory. Surround yourself by good people. Surround yourself by people who are passionate, who are from a different field, who scare you a little bit, who will challenge you to think. If I hadn't been surrounded by known entrepreneurs or lawyers or inventors, I probably wouldn't have dared myself. I probably wouldn't have, dared to go outside my own bounds of comfort. So these last 5 I've covered a little bit, but, I think they're worth repeating. So last week I told you to seek to be inspired and seek to inspire. And that doesn't just go for if, you're you're thinking about leaving your day job and starting some new venture. Not everyone needs to pivot, as Kim pointed out last week. Not everyone needs to be a visionary. But I think we can all, whether we're inspired in our own fields, whether we amaze ourselves in our own fields, I think life is just a little bit better in that respect. So, forgetting about titles, awards, and accolades. That actually for me was a little bit, probably the scariest thing, because when you're on this medicine track and you know that, hey, at the end of 4 years I'm supposed to do a residency and match to residency, and ideally at the end of it I should, have awards and have done things and volunteered and have a pretty nice long resume. And for that year, it was the first time I wasn't doing a million different volunteer activities. It was the first time that I wasn't applying for a million different scholarships. It was the first time that I wasn't working on a million different research projects. So I was heads down focused, but it was also the first time that I was driven to see an outcome to the end of the goal. So maybe it might just be one line on my resume now, CMO and co-founder of CivicArt. But when you hear the story, I think it's a lot more than that. Certainly a lot more than a scholarship. Talk to you about the need to adapt, to be flexible. So let's say this again. For anyone who's sitting on an idea, who thinks it's worth pursuing, but you're just a little bit too well vested in your current life situation, never be afraid to adapt. Always have a plan B, but never be afraid to adapt and pivot. And I don't need to tell you this because you're here at the Future of Technology and Medicine. You're here to hear about Singularity University. You're here to hear about brand new ideas, but put yourself out there. Meet like-minded people. Seek events where these things might happen. Foster ideas. Ask questions. Seek discussion. So I've gone on for long enough, and I do want to leave us time to have some discussion. We had a pretty good one last week, so I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please email me. Here's our respective email addresses, and I'll turn it over to you guys.